Hello, everybody. I am J.R. Gear. I lead L3 Harris's Washington operations. I'm really honored here to introduce, first of all, Dr. Stephen Wills from the Center of Maritime Strategy. Stephen is an expert in U.S. Navy strategy and policy and is a strong advocate of the importance of strategy to develop force structure and define responsibilities in theaters such as the Indo-Pacific. He's the author of two important books, Strategy Shelf, The Collapse of Cold War Naval Strategic Planning, and Where Are the Carriers? U.S. National Strategy and Choices Ahead. And I was lucky enough to tackle Stephen earlier, and he has a couple of his books with him. So if you want to get a signature, I'm sure he's going to be standing right out there and afterwards. Hey, I think more importantly, though, Stephen is a graduate of the prestigious Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where we served together as midshipmen, overlapping by 2 years and graduating Miami University's Naval ROTC unit. I just had the pleasure to go back over the weekend to attend their presidential review. It's fantastic to see midshipmen training and to get commissioned and then come and serve such an important mission in the Indo-Pacific. We all believe the nations of the world should enjoy unfettered access to the sea, air, and space domains upon which our nation's economies depend. And speaking for all the industry members here today, we understand the criticality of the situation at hand and the sense of urgency that we all must work smartly together to solve the capability, sustainment, and logistical challenges of our nation and our partners and everybody what they face keeping and maintaining the safe and open sea lanes. So with that, let me turn the microphone over to Stephen and to this prestigious panel and this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, JR. He was probably one of those senior midshipmen who kicked me around when I was a freshman or something like that. But thank you. And thank you very much, let me say, to L3 Harris for sponsoring this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first afternoon panel on the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific. We're very excited to have you here and to present this really well-informed panel that'll answer a couple of my questions and then hopefully get a chance to answer some of yours as well. And my panel guests have very graciously allowed me to go through some quick introductions, and then we'll kick it off immediately to our first main question. So without further ado, first joining us from the Department of Defense is Dr. Eli Ratner, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs. He's had a long and distinguished career in and out of government. He's a PhD political scientist from the University of California, Berkeley. Great place, lots of good Mexican restaurants there. Greatly enjoyed that. My wife's from that region, so I especially like that. He's been in addition to that, previously he was the director of DoD's China Task Force and senior advisor to China for the Secretary of Defense. He has worked for President Biden in several capacities as President Biden has progressed through government. And most recently, he was Director of Studies and Executive Vice President at the Center for New American Security. And he's also been a RAND Corporation analyst, so another FFRDCer. Dr. Ratner, thank you for joining us today. The Indo-Pacific is primarily a maritime theater, so it is most appropriate that we're joined today by Admiral Samuel Paparo, Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Pacific Fleet. He's a career strike fighter naval aviator who is commanded at the squadron, at the air group, and at the carrier strike group level. He's also an operations analyst. And Admiral Paparo, thank you so very much for journeying from sunny Hawaii to not so sunny Maryland necessarily to join us today. The Indo-Pacific requires a whole of government effort, and we'd be lost without our interagency partners. And first joining us is a key interagency partner in the maritime, Vice Admiral Mike Mccallister, who is the Coast Guard Pacific Fleet Area Commander in Alameda. He's responsible not only for providing direct support to the Department of Defense, but he commands an area stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the coast of Africa. I'm not sure anybody has that wide an area of responsibility. He's also a career cutterman. He's commanded 2 patrol boats. He led first responder efforts on 9/11 for the Coast Guard, and has served in a number of staff and command positions as well, including command in Alaska, another forbidding area. So Admiral, thank you for journeying from Alameda to join us today. The State Department is a key sponsor in all this because it's a political military effort throughout the region. And joining us today is Ms. Camille Dawson, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy. She is a career public diplomacy expert who has served in such wide spaces as Singapore and several tours in the People's Republic of China, and she's a fluent Mandarin speaker and knows Tagalog and about 4 or 5 other languages as well. So, Ms. Dawson, thank you so very much for coming over to join us today. Finally, none of our efforts in the Indo-Pacific are possible without the support of our industry partners, and joining us today to give a senior industry perspective is Mr. Tom Jones, who is the Corporate Vice President for Northrop Grumman's Aeronautics System. Aeronautics System. He's previously VP and General Manager of Airborne Sensors and Networks Division for Northrop Grumman, and before that, he worked some maritime systems for Boeing. Mr. Jones, thank you so very much for joining us today to provide an industry perspective. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we'll jump right into our first set of questions. So what I'd like to do first is, in order that they were introduced, I'd like to ask each of our panelists what their view of a free and open Indo-Pacific is and what specifically their agency or their command is doing to enable that. So without further ado, Dr. Ratner, the floor is yours, sir.
Great. Well, hello. All right. Thank you, Steve. Wonderful to be here. Great to see so many friends and with such a terrific group of colleagues up here on the panel. You know, we're here talking about the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is the priority theater for the Department of Defense, and we have made clear that we're committed to maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific region. When we talk about that, there are characteristics for that type of regional order that we mean by that, and these include territorial integrity, upholding sovereignty, respect for the international rules-based order around the world. And you know, these can sound very conceptual, right? Steve, you've worked at a think tank, so have I. We're inside the Beltway. We use these big words. Sometimes it feels a little ethereal, but what we're talking about here, I think, is, are we going to continue to have the kind of peace and stability that we've seen over the last several decades that's sustained our economic growth and our security here, or not? And I think what we're seeing now, frankly, in Ukraine is a prime example of what happens when that order breaks down. And you know, what we understand is that the PRC, that China is pursuing an alternative regional and international order, one that would not be defined by the kind of principles and rules that we believe have undergirded the kind of stability and prosperity that we have seen for some time. And that's not theoretical either, right? We have seen acts of growing assertiveness and at times aggression throughout China's periphery. We've seen it, the line of actual control vis-a-vis India, one of our greatest partners. We've seen it on a daily basis in the South China Sea, where Admiral Aquilino is just flying overhead, taking a bird's eye view on what's happening there. We are seeing it on a near daily basis in the Taiwan Strait. We are seeing it in the East China Sea, and we're seeing it in non-military domains as well. But we are seeing this kind of assertiveness and a desire to push against the kind of openness, the kind of small L liberal order that we believe has maintained, again, our peace and prosperity. So that's the challenge before us. I think many of us have been looking at this coming for a long time, but it's here now. This is not a future problem. This is a today problem. And so what is to be done about this? So you may have seen with the release of at least the fact sheet associated with the unclassified or the classified National Defense Strategy last week and in the months prior, Secretary Austin has described and identified the PRC as the department's top pacing challenge. So this is the focus of the Department of Defense as we are going about updating capabilities and concepts in our force posture in the region. And we are prioritizing capabilities, a number of which I'm sure Admiral Paparo will have a chance to talk about. We are also looking to build a much more distributed force posture in the region. That's something that my office is spending a great deal of time on, moving away from a fairly concentrated posture in Northeast Asia to something that's more resilient, more flexible, more lethal, more mobile throughout the region. So updating our posture is quite an important piece of that. And then broadening our alliances and partnerships. And I think one thing that I'll say is, as Steve mentioned, I have been in this job since about August of last year. Just incredibly encouraged. My portfolio covers roughly Indo-PACOM, a little bit more, but down through Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, over to South Asia. And with our most significant allies and partners from Northeast Asia, the Koreans, especially the Japanese, Taiwan's, Philippines, down through Australia, Vietnam, over to India, every one of those relationships has just incredible momentum behind it. And I think we really see that network of allies and partners as fundamental to maintaining those kinds of principles in that kind of free and open region. I'll stop there, and Admiral Paparo would like to build on that.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely, Admiral, go ahead.
Thanks, and I'd like to thank the Navy League for cultivating this discussion, which is such an important discussion that we have the opportunity to exchange ideas and to square up on these important issues of the day that are so essential to the security and to the well-being of the nation. And where Dr. Ratner discussed at the strategic level the importance of the international rules-based order to the security and well-being, I'll cover a little bit at the operational level. So his having identified the extent to which states and/or state actors bring to bear malign influence, violence from the gray zone on up, how Indo-PACOM, and specifically in my case, the maritime component in partnership with the Marine Corps and with the Coast Guard for the 3 maritime services, how we use the military instrument to integrate with the other instruments of national power to deliver operationally on the strategic design that is inherent in the national defense strategy. And so underscoring the revisionist viewpoint of our primary competitors, and we deal with 4 of the 5 priority threats between the PRC, Russia, North Korea, and violent extremist groups. But with regard to the PRC, the pacing challenge, when we talk about operationalizing a design, we think in terms of lines of operation of deny, defend, and dominate. And that is to deny our competitors' objectives within the critical geography of the first island chain, specifically to rehearse concepts to unify Taiwan by force to the mainland and to cement by convention and exclude all others in their excessive maritime claims in violation of the International Court of the Law of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea findings. And that's by freedom of navigation ops along all manner of features that are claimed by various states, by the exercise of freedom of navigation, by the fact that the United States Joint Force will sail and fly anywhere that international law allows. The sea being ruled by convention to depart that key space is to cede by convention that space. And we should be mindful of understanding the extent to which exclusive economic zones and territorial waters are a visceral and a vital matter on the part of our treaty allies and our partners. To defend our allies along the first island chain, treaty allies, as well as partners with whom we have mutual interests and with whom we are enjoined in coalitions. And then when our adversaries venture outside of that first island chain, to ensure that we have overmatch, so that as we all exercise freedom of navigation, everyone knows that today is not the day. Our lines of effort are to build and to demonstrate dynamic combat power. Apropos the earlier morning panel and apropos the National Defense Strategy, everything that we do must be underpinned by a profound and real capability to bring to bear overwhelming costs that exceed that which can be gained by force by those that would upend the international rules-based order. And in keeping is that deterrence is not an activity, but it is the outcome of a competitor's awareness that an actor has got the capability and the will to impose those costs. Our second line of effort is to strengthen our alliances and partnerships. There's a saying that we can judge our character by the friends that we keep. And I, along with everyone here in this room, are pretty proud of the wide-ranging international solidarity of actors with whom we are allied and partnered. And within this, you'll note that it's to strengthen alliances and partners. It is not a patronizing element. It is the fact that our allies and our partners come as they are in accordance with their sovereign desires, in accordance with the international rules-based order, and we find ways that we can team together. Dr. Ratner discussed the posture itself. We have got deep and profound partnerships in Northeast Asia, but in accordance with the concepts of the joint warfighting concept of expanded maneuver, it is widening the bases, the places, the relationships, the exercises throughout the Southwest Pacific, throughout Southeast Asia, and as well as in the Indian Ocean, and welcome partners from across the world to come into the Indo-Pacific and to operate with the joint and with the combined force. And then the final line of operation, and the one that encompasses all, is to communicate effectively. Our adversaries must know what our intentions and what our capabilities are in order to build that deterrent force. We must be aligned along with our allies and partners, and then the American people who support us with their hard work every day, who pay the bills for the security and the well-being that the joint force and all of government delivers, must know what we're doing. So just a brief discussion at the operational level of how we manifest the strategy, as so astutely put by Dr. Ratner. And then onward to my fellow navalist. You can introduce Mike, but we're thick as thieves and as partners within the Naval Service.
Hey, thank you very much, sir. And that aggressive exercise program has been labeled by many as key to success at the end of the Cold War, and we're seeing that, again, being successfully displayed out in the Indo-Pacific today. But again, our interagency partners are essential. Vice Admiral Mccallister, over to you, sir.
Well, let me start off by saying thank you for allowing us to participate here today. Congratulations on standing up the new Center for Maritime Strategy. So great to see it in action here. I see Amofogo here in the front. And I don't know who set up the seating here, but it's entirely appropriate that I'm here between the lethality of DoD and the diplomacy of the Department of State, because we kind of have a foot in both camps. We certainly contribute to the integrated deterrence, the military effort that prevents bad things from happening, but we also work in the cooperation and competition phase to do our best in an interagency forum to try to set the right environment throughout the region. And I want to go back, if I could, just to something that Dr. Ratner said about gray zone activity. This is absolutely on the minds of our allies and partners in the region. Just by happenstance, this evening I get the opportunity to engage with graduate students from the Philippines Coast Guard, and they are absolutely on the front line, right? The Chinese Coast Guard, this is not how Coast Guards normally behave, using water cannons against resupply ships for Second Thomas Shoal, as an example. I mean, they are absolutely on the front line, and we do our best to build partnerships that are helpful, not only with the Philippines, but throughout the region. In terms of Coast Guard roles, I really do want to go back to cooperation and competition. While we engage across the full spectrum, cooperation, competition, and conflict, I think our greatest value is in those first two phases. And we certainly try to contribute to regional stability and security, as was mentioned here before. And we have some unique Coast Guard attributes that allow us to do that. While we're a military organization, we also act as a civilian organization. We have law enforcement authorities, we have regulatory authorities. We're good at things like disaster response and so forth. And the types of activities that we do would be familiar to you. Certainly capacity building in the region, joint operations, shared education and training, information sharing, particularly in the unclassified realm, which allows us to engage with more partners. But we are really big on trying to build those bilateral and multilateral relationships that build confidence and capacity for regions in the nation to be able to exert sovereignty in their waters as best they can. And that's an area that requires a lot of focus. And we get into places that it's difficult for other military services of the United States to get into. As an example, we now have a very helpful relationship with the Taiwan Coast Guard Administration. An MOU was signed not too long ago. And we've exercised it multiple times. We just had a ship go through Papua New Guinea, and we're about to sign an MOU as a result of that ship visit. We had a ship recently in Vietnam, and while that relationship has been on again, off again over time, it's working back to on again, and we're looking forward to engaging with the Vietnam Coast Guard and others to grow that relationship. And then lastly, we try to have an effective presence in the region. When I deploy ships and aircraft, I deploy them under PAC fleet control. In fact, you may find it surprising that we've worked out a lot of the kinks in C2 that have been challenges over time. Sitting here today, I could chop my forces, including myself, over to Admiral Paparo, and it would be that quick, and maybe not that easy, but it would be that quick, and we would fight together. But we also have a lot of small teams. We do a lot of face-to-face interaction, particularly with these smaller navies and coast guards in the region, and we find great value in that. All of this is very much consistent with the Indo-Pacific Strategy that the White House released just a couple of months ago now, and I'll quote one particular section of it because this is exactly what we're doing. It says, "We will expand U.S. Coast Guard presence and cooperation in Southeast and South Asia and the Pacific Islands, with a focus on advising, training, deployment, and capacity building maritime capacity and maritime domain awareness, and expanding the role of people-to-people exchanges." I couldn't say it more simply than that. I will end by saying, while our greatest value is in that cooperation and competition phase, we are ready to fight. We do have presence on front lines in places where Admiral Paparo and others just have a tough time providing at least a visible presence. Places like the Arctic, the Antarctic. We spend a lot of time in Oceania amongst Pacific Island nations where our Coast Guard, particularly some of our smaller ships, can get into and kind of match capabilities there. But I also deploy ships to the Western Pacific because it is appropriate to integrate our capabilities. And when the bullets start flying, we have a very strong homeland defense mission as well. And a lot of our resources will go to that. So it's important that we really live to our motto, which is Semper Paratus, always ready, for engagements all across that spectrum. And I just appreciate, again, sitting between these two different elements, an opportunity to tie it all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And as you said, white hulls go places and do things and interact in ways that gray hulls always can't. And you are absolutely vital to a free and open Indo-Pacific. So thank you. Ms. Dawson, over to you, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to join my panelists in thanking the Navy League for putting this opportunity together. And I'm so pleased to be able to sit with such a distinguished group of fellow panelists. There has been mention already of the Indo-Pacific Strategy, and I want to go a little bit more in depth on that. The Indo-Pacific Strategy is the Biden-Harris's policy that lays, the Biden-Harris administration's policy that lays out the U.S. vision for the region. And that's a vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific that is connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. And the institution that I represent, the Department of State, plays a fundamental role in the implementation of virtually every aspect of the Indo-Pacific Strategy. The Indo-Pacific Strategy lays out an action plan in which the United States will strengthen our own role while also reinforcing the region itself. There are 5 key pillars of the strategy, and I'll mention those briefly. The first is advance freedom and openness. The second is build collective capacity within and beyond the region. The third is promote shared prosperity. The fourth is bolster Indo-Pacific security. And the fifth is build regional resilience. So these 5 pillars are all interlocking, and each of them plays a part in building better opportunities for the people of the region and also ensuring that the region is better prepared to weather crises and ensure stability. It also reflects a convergence of interest by like-minded countries, both inside and outside the Indo-Pacific region. And many of these countries have their own Indo-Pacific strategies that share similar core precepts to our own. The intensifying focus of the U.S. on the Indo-Pacific region is due in part to the fact that the region faces mounting challenges, particularly from the People's Republic of China. The PRC is combining its economic, diplomatic, military, and technological might as it pursues a sphere of influence in the Indo-Pacific. The PRC's provocative and intimidating behavior spans the globe, but it is most acute in the Indo-Pacific region. So the U.S. is working to counter this by modernizing our alliances, strengthening partnerships, and investing in regional organizations. The really essential feature of this approach is that none of it can be accomplished alone. The changing strategic circumstances and the historic challenges that we currently face require unprecedented cooperation with all of those who share in our vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So unique, I think, amongst the panelists here today, the State Department's primary lane is out of the military or kinetic operations, but that doesn't mean we don't contribute to the defense of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Just by way of one example, we recently published a Limits in the Sea study that laid out the PRC's claims in the South China Sea and found those to be inconsistent with international law. Our rejection of the PRC's claims is based on what coastal states can and cannot do under international law as reflected in UNCLOS. And that rejection is rooted in international law, which the PRC is subject to, and shows that we are not simply engaged in a struggle for spheres of influence. Rather, we are engaged in a struggle to uphold the rules-based international order that creates the framework for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Again, the Indo-Pacific Strategy's overarching emphasis is on the need to work in close concert with our allies and partners. They are absolutely key to our success in the region, and the convergence of our shared efforts has been extremely encouraging. We are working daily with allies and partners to reinforce the rules-based international order and deter adversaries who shape who seek to reshape the region in their favor. Collective maritime security is vitally important in this respect as we strive to enhance maritime domain awareness through information sharing, detection, and patrolling. And with respect to maritime security in the region, I would also like to say a few words on freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs, which have already been mentioned. Of course, most of you are well aware of the operational and strategic importance of FONOPs. And we at the State Department are also focused on sharing information about our FONOPs with our allies and partners to further ensure that these operations achieve their intended purpose. We continually receive feedback that countries in the Indo-Pacific region, especially South China Sea claimants, are sensitive to having to choose between the United States and China. And we therefore make clear in our public and private messaging that FONOPs are a global program that push back against a wide variety of excessive maritime claims and are not targeted specifically at the PRC or against the PRC or any other country. Rather, FONOPs reflect our general commitment to sail, fly, and operate wherever legally permitted. And it is crucial that the motivation for this vital program to support compliance with international law of the sea is properly understood. From an economic perspective, as Secretary of State Antony Blinken has mentioned in specific in a speech laying out our Indo-Pacific vision in Jakarta last November, the Department of State's current work promotes broad-based prosperity in the Indo-Pacific by shaping the rules of the digital economy, supporting sustainable and inclusive commercial activity across the region, working with partners to make our supply chains more secure and resilient, and delivering high-quality, transparent infrastructure. And we also promote freedom and openness in the Indo-Pacific by defending an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet. Lastly, with respect to the question concerning the defense of the Indo-Pacific, our team in Washington and our embassy personnel across the region always keep one eye on the present and one on the future. Our diplomats, in collaboration with our interagency colleagues and industry, work towards avoiding the need to defend the region, but we also continue to lay the groundwork by building the people-to-people connections that will be vitally important should that day ever come. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Dawson. As everyone knows, we don't have a NATO in the Indo-Pacific. And while our military partners build quads, trilaterals, and bilateral relationships, it's the State Department that really fills these in and makes them the firm frameworks that hold us all together. So thank you so much. Mr. Jones, over to you, sir, for the industry perspective on a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So first of all, thank you very much. Very excited to be on this panel as the industry representative. I'm going to try in this talk to represent generic concerns or reflections from industry broadly. However, as I give various examples, those will be the examples I'm most familiar with of some of the products that we deal with. So, I think that the first message as we work to support our warfighters and the services is that industry, has a strong desire to partner with our defense services to make sure we're able to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open. And I think this partnership covers everything from working upfront to help rapidly define requirements and systems that can solve the technological challenges we have, all the way to working through sustainment issues to drive the availability into the platforms and systems that we've already delivered. I can think of one example where we as Northrop partnered recently with the U.S. Navy Air Boss to address availability issues with the E-2Ds. And by working together as a team being involved weekly with the meetings in terms of those aircraft and availability. We're able to reach a challenge to get to a mission capability rate the Navy requested 5 months ahead of time. So that's an example that I think, again, it's a personal example, but I believe that everyone in the industry shares that same desire to partner. Also, my colleague from L3 Harris and the sponsor of this session, as he opened up, spoke about urgency. And I think urgency and agility is something that we in industry are all trying to figure out how we can respond. Because one thing that is certain from an industry perspective is that the speed of innovation is much, much greater than the speed of procurement. And we need to figure out how we can accelerate that, because I think that American innovation is the best, and I believe in the acquisition system that we have, but frankly, our adversaries are able to go much quicker to direct acquisition. So we need to use techniques like digital engineering and the digital transformation to make sure we can streamline acquisition, development, test, and delivery to the fleet as much as we can. So urgency and agility, I think, would be one of the key points I'd bring up here. I also think that for a region this large, ISR is key. In fact, I was talking to someone earlier on, and I said, it's ISR, 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 right? There's actually a recent study within the last couple of years by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Analysis that was actually called Deterrence by ISR. So the deterrent effect of having effective ISR platforms in the region. I think the region is so large that it's not just something that's going to be accomplished by our forces alone. As has been mentioned multiple times, the cooperation with our partners and allies is essential. As an example, right now, one of the products that we support our allies and partners and the U.S. Navy with are HALE, high altitude, long endurance platforms. We have Global Hawk systems in Korea. We've just delivered 2 Global Hawk systems to Japan. We also have Tritons operating for the U.S. Navy and are preparing to deliver Tritons to the Australian Navy. So this is a great ISR platform or set of platforms that, again, offers the ability to share data back and forth across our allies and partners. And I think that's really the third key message of what we need to work on to make sure we're supporting our service members in the Indo-PACOM region, is to make sure we're working and driving the interoperability into these systems. So that can be done in many cases by some of the commonality that I mentioned, by encouraging common use of the same platforms, be they F-35s or Tritons or E-2Ds or whatever, across a general theater, but also making sure that we're working to build the ability to communicate back and forth between these systems, even if they're sovereign-built systems. And I think this is something we need to wrap our heads around here in the United States. The defense industry is a key part of every country's industrial base. We are seeing an increased desire of different countries to have their own sovereign-built capabilities, which I understand. But I think what we need to do is figure out how we can build more cases for co-development, so that in those cases where there's critical systems for interoperability, we can do the co-development with our allies and partners to make sure that we have the ability to cross-communicate between all these platforms. I think AUKUS is a really great example of a case that has just been started to go out and really look at how we collaborate, not just on nuclear-powered submarines, but also looking in areas of computers, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and quantum computing, all key areas that I think will help create a secure Indo-PACOM in the future.
Thank you very much, sir. ISR is a critical capability out there, and some of the best work on unmanned systems that's been developed is for ISR. And certainly what you spoke of in terms of interoperability is important. Just the State Department helps forge some of those relationships initially made by the military. Interoperability among systems helps to solidify them as well, so thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was our first question. The second question, I think, is a little more edgy. So When we think about a free and open Indo-Pacific, one of the first things we often think about are sea lines of communication, and specifically protecting our own, and those of our friends and allies that are in the region as well. They're very long, and they stretch all the way across the Indo-Pacific, in some cases to the Middle East, to Europe, and throughout. Unlike the Cold War, however, our principal adversary also has very long sea lines of communication on which they rely for the importation of large amounts of hydrocarbons and also for export of their own industrial products. As we've seen too in the recent invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, economic warfare has taken on a new role in the ability of nations to limit what an aggressor does. The question I would like to pose to our panelists is, in the event of aggression in the Indo-Pacific, can economic warfare tools, perhaps such as blockade, be used against potential adversaries throughout the spectrum of conflict and even into conflict itself, but also what are the dangers of attempting to use that particular concept? And I'll start with Dr. Ratner, so thank you.
Okay, great. That's a good question. Trying to keep folks awake after lunch.
Absolutely.
So, look, I think clearly when we're and it's well represented here on the panel. I think the question leads to the insight that we have to be thinking about using the full set of tools in the toolkit from the U.S. government, and we can't be thinking about sort of the economic set as somehow divorced from the military set. And that's really been actually the heart of the National Defense Strategy, the heart of Secretary Austin's thinking about integrated deterrence, which is a concept he has put forward, which is not just about within the Defense Department in terms of thinking cross-domain and across the spectrum of conflict, but also how do you, as you're thinking about deterrence, as you're thinking about potential conflict scenarios, how are you also going to bring to bear economic tools, diplomatic tools, how you think about incorporating allies and partners in a very real way. So I think that's very much the focus of how the government as a whole is approaching these issues. And for the Defense Department, of course, at the core of that is going to be combat credible deterrence, as Admiral Paparo was describing, and ensuring that our adversaries have no misperception that there somehow is going to be a very easy or very quick, cost-free act of aggression in the Indo-Pacific. And he can speak very eloquently about all the different ways that we're doing that. He already has touched on them a little bit about deny and defend and otherwise. But we have to be thinking about the economic and the diplomatic pieces of this as well, and we are. And I think rather than getting into the theoretical, I think what I'll say about this is, if you look at the lessons of Ukraine, I think are pretty clear, right? Which is, number one, the military operations are probably going to be more difficult than you think for a whole bunch of reasons, because you're not tested in the way that you think you are, because your adversary is probably stronger than you think it is, and because the terrain might be more difficult than you've anticipated, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at the types of acts of aggression that we worry about in the Indo-Pacific, and the Taiwan Strait being at the top of that list, it's going to be very difficult. And I think there are broad lessons there to be drawn from Ukraine. But it goes more broadly than just the military domain. And of course, if you look at the economic response from the international community, which I think has gone much further than many expected, I think probably further than the Russians expected, further than the leaders in Beijing expected. And I think that's a very important lesson, particularly for an economy in China that's in very bad shape, and probably in worse shape than, certainly in worse shape than they're telling their people, possibly in worse shape than their leadership is aware. But to be, I think, facing potentially that kind of economic penalty and cost for acts of aggression is something one would not take wisely when your own economy is facing such incredible headwinds as the one in China is now. And then finally, diplomatically, what we have seen is a very united coalition against that act of aggression. And I think that should be a warning to others as well. The Russians and the Chinese have spent decades now trying to chip away at America's alliances in Asia, trying to divide the United States from its partners, had been doing this in a very concerted way in Europe. And I think it's been incredibly encouraging, the degree to which NATO has come together, not just around the Russia question, but around this question of the rules-based order and the importance of the relationship with the United States. And Exhibit A on this is the EU-China summit that just happened on Friday, which I think Beijing got a pretty cold reception, frankly, from the Europeans. And I think that reflected their concerns about China's aggression and assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific, but also to the degree which Beijing has been enabling and supporting Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So again, again, zooming back from your question, I don't think it's just about thinking, okay, is it going to be economic warfare? What's the toolkit? But rather ensuring that you have the military piece in place, the economic piece, and the diplomatic piece.
You have to have the framework first, obviously, before you start thinking about the toolkit. But we can talk about the toolkit as well, and maybe Admiral Paparo can talk about the toolkit. He owns it.
Thanks, Stephen. I own some of the tools.
You own some of the toolkit.
But certainly nations that are highly dependent on finished and unfinished goods traveling by the sea are vulnerable to the leveraging that critical vulnerability in order to achieve national objectives. And the military instrument has a role in it, but that role will nest within a broader interagency synchronization of the instruments of national power. And in the way that you might read read Ian Toll's Twilight of the Gods, and the fact that the U.S. submarine force focused on the Japanese shipping industry, everything has changed in the last 80 years. And so maritime shipping, the cargo may be on a bill of lading between two states. The ship may be owned by a Greek shipping company. It may be flagged under a flag of convenience. It may be, the officers could be Eastern European. The crew could be from another part of the world. And in the same way that international economies have globalized, so too has the shipping industry. The military instrument will have a role within this, but as the nation is thinking about how it might screen, quarantine, blockade finished and unfinished goods to a nation, this will necessarily be a wider conversation, and the military instrument will nest within it, maybe sometimes in a attributable or minimally attributable manner, and it will be all of a piece of a wide-ranging ability to interdict and to screen these goods with a sensitivity to international markets. That being said, is that the Joint Force must maintain a capability of the knowledge of the world's critical choke points and how we could bring force to bear in order to use the military instrument profoundly in that manner. I will just say that the targeting, and when I say targeting, that is the knowledge of all of the entities that are involved and what all of the risks are of an operation like that, both to our own economies, the economies of allies and partners, it will necessarily have to be a joint and interagency, a combined and an allied effort to exploit those vulnerabilities. And I would also think about them in a nuanced manner, in a way that could signal an intent to an adversary, but still hold something in reserve by going to 11, to quote a certain movie, to quote a certain movie. And I have been a part of these operations in the past. I have been partnered with states that fell victim to some of these techniques in the past as well. And it's an area of tremendous nuance. There's a role for the Joint Force, but it would be under a rare set of circumstances that the Joint Force would become the primary instrument of national power to close that spigot. And in the way that 80 years ago, the world was much simpler in terms of the movement of goods and services across the world. Globalization in the wake of the Second World War has turned this from what might be a military problem into something that's more a national and interagency and allied problem, given the interdependencies of the economy?
Thank you, sir. It is, as one of my Naval War College professors would have said, a wicked problem to deal with. It's been tried before. The Royal Navy had a plan before the First World War to collapse the Imperial German economy, but pulled back on that because not only trading partners like the United States, but also the City of London itself said, no way, this is really a bad idea. That's going to cost a lot to our own economy. And it is very much an interagency question. And the Coast Guard would probably play a role in trying to facilitate that, a big role. So let's go to Vice Admiral Mccallister next, sir. Can we do that, or is that a bridge too far?
I think I may just add to your complexity a little bit rather than answering the question directly.
Of course.
But once again, I sit appropriately, kind of between defense, interagency, and maritime industries. And Admiral Paparo hit it, exactly. I'll give you a little bit of context to what the Admiral shared already. So 80% of global trade moves by maritime means, 60% of that through the waters of Southeast Asia. 95% of U.S. trade comes by water. So as we think about vulnerability of our forces, our economy, we need to take that into account. And it's a very interesting question. I mean, we actually spend far more of our time keeping sea lanes open, working on economic prosperity around the world, unrestricted access to maritime commons. So, this is 180 degrees out. And as the Admiral also said, it is a very complex international maritime network out there nowadays. Many, many different flags involved. So if your attempt was to try to keep something regional, this in itself will make it global. Now that presents both challenges and opportunities because there are many flags that are allies of ours and can take action on their industry participants as well. China is the U.S.'s largest trading partner, so it brings up the question, do we have the national will to shut down sea lanes of communication? And, we saw through for completely other reasons that in some respects we lack economic resiliency in our own country. And, with just-in-time inventories and the latest supply chain backlogs, we're seeing the effects of that every day. So we must be careful. That said, Coast Guard, interagency, certainly Navy, Marine Corps, others do have the capacity, capability, perhaps not all the capacity, but the capability of doing this work. And as Admiral alluded to, we do that work now in various places around the world. UNSCR type of enforcement, Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea, counter-proliferation work, counter-drug work. This is not new work for us. Talking about China makes it a completely different scale of problem. And then I'll offer once again, and I see Admiral Gortney, my former boss at Northcom, out in the audience here. You got to worry about the homeland at the same time you're worrying about the away game. And particularly if our adversaries have the ability to send forces at a distance, our capacity amongst all the sea services is going to be tapped pretty quickly in protecting our own economic lifelines, and so worthy of consideration.
Thank you very much, sir. What say State Department to this wicked international problem where cargo could be sold before it was even blockaded? So,
all right. Well, I would like to hearken back to the toolkit here, right? So my fellow panelists have already spoken a bit about the tools that make up DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic national tools. So that the M part of that, I think, is being well addressed. So I'd like to speak a little bit more about the D, the I, and the E here. Diplomacy is absolutely at the forefront of our efforts, with our diplomats on the front lines every day, strengthening our ties with treaty allies and partners from across the region. That's, including Japan, Australia, Republic of Korea, and through multilateral partnerships as well, such as ASEAN, the Quad, AUKUS, and many others. And increasingly, that coordination with like-minded partners in countering PRC influence is producing broad-based and unified support for our shared priorities. When we look at Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, that has resulted in a really unprecedented response from countries across Asia. That includes, but is not limited to, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Micronesia, and others standing together in support of sanctions and other measures against Russia, and also collectively calling out Putin's war of aggression and the PRC's refusal to acknowledge Russian atrocities. This kind of multilateral alignment in our messaging can really only be achieved through strong diplomatic ties with our partners and allies, and it is essential to reinforcing solidarity and articulating a unified message of support for the people of Ukraine, but also to undermine the Russian and PRC disinformation campaigns in contested local information environments. From that informational perspective, we are using many of the tools in the information toolkit, though there is always still more to be done. We are working to enhance cybersecurity capabilities for our own government and for that of our allies and partners to ensure our information is protected and that we can share critical information and intelligence with our like-minded partners. In seeking to counter the disinformation campaigns that we see taking root in the region and around the globe, we, on the U.S. side, seek to advance fact-based, coordinated, and consistent messaging, both across the U.S. government and also with our close partners and allies. And we push back on disinformation by exposing and puncturing false narratives, supporting third-party validators, and working with media to get accurate information out to the public. We do, at times, have to call out disinformation directly. We do that when needed. But we also know that the most effective way to call out another actor's bad behavior is to pair that with a statement about what the United States is doing to offer positive solutions to the problem at hand. And then lastly, I'll just turn to the economic instrument, and that has been addressed already to some extent, but it's really critical to point out that the prosperity of everyday Americans is directly linked to the economies of the Indo-Pacific. Two-way trade between the U.S. and the region totaled $1.75 trillion in 2020, supports millions of jobs both in the Indo-Pacific and here in the United States. The U.S. remains the #1 investment partner in parts of the region, in particular in ASEAN member countries. And the U.S. is the primary exporter of services to the region, and that in turn fuels economic growth both in the region and in the United States. We will continue to work to enhance our economic ties with partners in the region. We are doing that through things such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework to harness technological transformation and adapt to coming energy and climate transition. We're doing it through the Build Back Better World initiative to promote investment in high standard infrastructure and priority sectors such as clean energy and digital communications. And we will also work through APEC to promote free, fair, and open trade and investment during our coming 2023 APEC host year. And finally, we will work with our like-minded partners who are setting and enforcing the rules that govern 21st century economic activity in the region. Our strength, both now and in the future, lies with our alliances, and I think it's an incredibly encouraging sign that we have seen many Indo-Pacific countries support these strong actions against Russia.
Thank you. It would certainly take a strong framework to wage any kind of economic campaign like that. And finally, Mr. Jones, it's said that nothing is really built in one place. It's assembled from a variety of places. And industry historically doesn't like things like blockade. It's bad for business. Can you offer an industry perspective on what challenges or what can be sustained in economic warfare from where you sit?
You know, it's always a good thing to understand your limitations. And I think in this case, as an engineer, sharing the stage with a couple of policy experts from OSD and the Department of State and some of the operators from the Indo-PACOM area, probably getting into the economics and issues associated with economic blockades is probably not in my wheelhouse as much as has been discussed. I would like to maybe talk about some of the areas as a technologist that I believe we would have to support, once again, to support our warfighters should they want to do maritime interdiction or, quite frankly, targeting, because I think they're relatively common. It goes back to some of the points that I opened up with to the first question, right? I think the first issue is we really, if we want to do blockades, need to have very good ISR. We need to more fully develop artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think those are critical to really finding the needle in the haystack in a very, very busy Indo-PACOM, shipping lanes and transit areas. To do that, that's probably, once again, relying on our coalition partners, allies, collecting data from different areas to look at patterns of life, which patterns of life, quite frankly, are going to vary based on different geographic locations. So that should the event arise where we have to do some sort of action, we're able to quickly find out those people who are acting different to normal. Again, the sharing of data that I talked about is key to that because it's, we used to always say, and any sensor, any shooter, I guess this is any sensor, any interdictor or something along those lines, but the same concept and requirements would hold. Finally, I imagine Vice Admiral Mccallister probably has to deal with smugglers as part of his overall charter, and I imagine you could attest that they're probably fairly creative at what they do. As soon as they figure out they're getting caught one way, they have to go another way. So that gets back to that theme of agility, urgency, being able to take the systems that we deliver that would be able to help us prosecute a blockade or other maritime interdiction types of efforts and very rapidly adapt to our adversaries' changing tactics and procedures. So that's, from an industry perspective, what I think we need to deliver to make sure we can allow the services to accomplish the mission they're asked to do by our policymakers.
Thank you, sir. And as you said originally, ISR is critical to all of that, considering the area that would have to be covered to conduct that sort of economic campaign. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we've concluded with our two main questions, and we have time to open it up. And what I'd like to do, since I have been aimed this way, watching my fellow panelists the whole time, if we have any questions first on this side of the room, let me grab somebody. Just put your hand up. And if you've got a question, I will grab you. And if not, I'm going to move. Sir, would you go ahead? Please identify yourself and ask your question.
George Spears, Kansas City, retired Navy chaplain. We're thinking of Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. We're thinking of Japan, Australia, and New Zealand as allies of the United States. I'm also thinking of India, Indo-Pacific. So my question to you folks is, what kind of barriers are still present that keep India from being a strong ally, as the other three aforementioned nations are, and who's doing whatever about it?
Thank you, sir. And I guess I'll start with Dr. Ratner first and work our way down. Sir, if you would like to respond to that question.
Sure. Well, of course, we have 5 treaty ally partners in the Indo-Pacific, including Thailand and the Philippines as well, in addition to Japan, Australia, and South Korea. India is an incredibly important partner, really important question. I think we have seen over the last decade tremendous growth in the U.S.-India relationship, and the maritime piece has been absolutely at the center of that. I think what we are aiming for is to support India's own modernization, to deepen the U.S.-India partnership itself, so we're more interoperable and operating together, and then to bring India into and with the network of partners that we're working with throughout the region, and the Quad has been the prime example of that. Actually, on Monday, 1 week from today, we will be having our premier engagement of the year with the Indians. It's a 2+2 with Secretary Austin, Secretary Blinken, and their counterparts, where we'll be running through a number of issues throughout the relationship, and the Secretary will be spending a good amount of time with Minister Singh beforehand, going through the bilateral relationship. There continue to be challenges, but I think we are overcoming them. Some of them are historical, some of them relate to technology transfer, et cetera, some of the legacy systems that India uses. But by and large, this is a relationship that, in my view, is on a rocket trajectory going upward, and couldn't be more important.
First of all, Chaplain, thank you very much for your service, and very grateful to be a fellow sailor with you. And number two, first you talked about what the barriers were. Dr. Ratner talked about is that having had a discussion with a number of their officials, with senior Navy officials, they expressed to me that our relationship is now irrevocable, is the quote that my Indian partners frequently tell me. So the intention is there, but there is a tradition of being a leader within the non-aligned movement that will take time, as will all things. And as Dr. Ratner discussed earlier too, there is a vestigial relationship with other partners that makes some technology transfer a challenge. But navies have a way of partnering that are more conducive than maybe any other service, because the grounds on which that we are participating, pun intended, are maritime, and out beyond the 12-mile limit, we're enabled by vast geography in order to participate. Your question was, what specifically are we doing about it in order to enhance those partnerships? Exercises such as the Malabar exercise, which is in the Andaman Sea, key critical maritime geography with bilateral, trilateral, and frequently multilateral operations among the Quad nations. The Quad itself is a diplomatic arrangement. There is no treaty alliance with India, but there is a lot of partnered behavior that reflects the intent of all of the states to intertwine their national fates together to support the international rules-based order. And one of the discussion items is that the world's oldest and the world's largest democracies have the ability to partner together. And I've just come in the last month from India, where we were an eager participant in Milan 22. Milan is a Hindi word for meeting of the minds, if you like. And so every month it gets better. Every month we're on a steeper and steeper trajectory as we converge in terms of our interests and in terms of our values, and it's profound. But there are decades of vestigial behaviors that we have to overcome it. And the mindset is that working towards an ultimate goal where our forces are interoperable and interchangeable, we increase our trajectory with maritime forces being a key locus of that activity because of the nature of our behaviors beyond the 12-mile limit are very conducive to partnering together. And as a fellow sailor, I thought you might appreciate that fact as well. And very much appreciate your question, Reverend Beard.
I'll add just briefly to the thoughts already provided by Dr. Ratner and Admiral Paparo, which I thought were spot on in our observations as well. But before I do so, the Navy chaplains also serve the United States Coast Guard. I don't know if you had the opportunity, but we really couldn't get our mission done without our Navy chaplains. So thank you for that. I love this term, partnered behavior. We're doing some of that as well. India actually has a fairly mature Coast Guard equivalent. And we've done a number of key leader engagements. I think we're notionally planning some ship interactions and exchanges in the not too distant future. And as Dr. Ratner said, taking the opportunity to tie them into the multilateral organizations that the U.S. values the most is certainly our goal. Although there are obstacles, as Admiral Paparo has already identified, to doing that, and we see exactly those same attitudes and concerns just in building our relationships.
Thank you.
I'll add just briefly that the Quad, as has been mentioned by my fellow panelist, is very much focused on bringing India into the important actions that we are taking in the region to address some of the most pressing challenges of the day. So the US, Australia, Japan, and India working together are elevating the Quad as an important mechanism for doing some of our most important work in the Indo-Pacific region. And we have, in just the past year now, year plus, seen the Quad convene at the leaders level, meaning at the presidential level, twice, with an additional video meeting in there. We just in February had the Quad convene at the foreign minister level, and we are looking for the Quad leaders to convene again in Tokyo in the near future. There are a number of ways in which the Quad is taking tangible action, including in the maritime space through a Quad maritime working group, maritime security working group. We are also working together on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And India is taking a real leadership role in that process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Jones.
Certainly, thank you. From an industrial perspective, really we operate under the export regulations defined by the Department of Defense, Department of State, called the ITAR regulations. And those work to mitigate some of the risk issues that Dr. Ratner and Admiral Paparo spoke of previously. However, once granted export license to India, there's really no restrictions in terms of how we can support those partners from that perspective. And in fact, there's cases even in recent history of arms sales to India. So really within the export guidelines, there's no restrictions.
Thank you so very much. I think we have time for one more short question. Yes, sir, in the back, whose hand is high. Thank you.
Hi, Sam Legrone from USNI News. Just a quick one. We're talking about China in these very sort of kind of generalized terms. And the last specific kind of really good kind of lay down of what their fleet looked like came out from O&I in 2015. Are y'all doing enough to sort of articulate the threat specifically militarily of China? Because I think from the open source, unclassified stance, there really isn't a ton of information out there to sort of express that. And if you're thinking back to the 80s, to the John Lehman 600 ship buildup, there was Soviet military power, which was, hey, I want you to know that there are 2 Oscar-class submarines off the East Coast at any given moment. So are y'all doing enough from your perception to sort of articulate the threat in all practical purposes? Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I didn't recognize you when you're not at your full height. Thank you very much. We have to make it quick. Secretary Ratner?
Well, just very quickly, we do have a annual China military power report, congressionally mandated, that my office produces in close collaboration with DIA that we put out every year. It has a classified version as well for inside the department and inside the government reading. So that is the unclassified version. I think there's a lot of good work being done in the FFRDCs as well, but the unclassified version is an extremely comprehensive treatment of strategy and operations and capability, modernization and intent and otherwise. So I would urge folks to take a look at that if they're looking for at least the latest unclassified U.S. government assessment on the PLA.
Thanks, sir. Follow up?
At the operational level, everybody is aware of the anti-access area denial capabilities that the PRC has brought to bear, an unprecedented program of building, including the DF-21, DF-26, and DF-27, and so forth, including hyperglide vehicles that would deny the battle space to any intervention force that was able to intervene on the PRC's upending of the international rules-based order. And then a profound program of building out Type 1 and Type 2 surface combatants, a profound building program for submarine capabilities. They'll soon deliver their 3rd aircraft carrier. This is a profound air missile maritime threat that we must counter in order to uphold the security and the well-being of the Western Pacific, which directly impacts the United States. And the specifics are in the report that Dr. Ratner is discussing. And this point does and should inspire a bipartisan resolve to be able to counter these capabilities. And I've found in my duty that it has, in fact, inspired that resolve to counter those capabilities because of the direct impact on the security and the well-being of the nation.
Thanks, sir. Admiral Mccallister, last point, because I think we're out of time.
Yeah, the U.S. used to have the largest Coast Guard in the world. We're not even close anymore. So China is, they brought the 5 dragons together in a Coast Guard-like form. They have been on a shipbuilding spree. And as I've kind of alluded to before, it's not exactly model Coast Guard behavior, at least as we would define it amongst the U.S. and our allies and partners. And then when you add the maritime militia into that, which is, kind of pseudo-governmental, many hundreds of commercial fishing vessels and other types, it's a very concerning situation. And that's the true asymmetry in Southeast Asia right now. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention China's cyber capability. And as the Coast Guard's the sector lead for maritime transportation system cybersecurity, we spend a lot of time working with maritime industries, ports, and others to ensure that they are well protected. When there's incidents, they are quickly reported and that information is shared broadly so that we can take appropriate action. But that's yet another avenue where China has been growing and engaging in gray zone type activities that are concerning to us.
And thank you very much, sir. And with that, that concludes our panel for this afternoon. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. And on behalf of my boss, Admiral Fogo, thank you to all of you for attending and hope you enjoy the rest of Sea Airspace. Thank you.